Most men learn their marriage is finished when divorce papers land in front of them. I learned mine was finished in my own basement, and before I even understood what was happening, my name was already attached to things I had never touched. My name is Daniel Carter. I am 51 years old. I own a modest 3-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio. I coach youth soccer on Saturday mornings, and until 11 days ago, I honestly believed I was one of the fortunate ones. We will get there, but first, do us one quick favor: subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs nothing, and it means a lot to us. Hit the like button too, and after you have listened, leave your thoughts in the comments. You are going to like it here. Now let me tell you about my wife. Her name is Melissa Carter. We had been married for 15 years and together for 18. She liked lavender candles, true crime podcasts, which in hindsight should probably have looked like a warning sign the size of Montana, and she took her coffee with exactly 1 sugar and a small splash of oat milk. I knew this woman, I knew her. At least I believed I did. Everything began on a Tuesday in February, which is already the worst month of the year. Melissa was in Atlanta visiting her college roommate, Jenna. She had been gone for 3 days. I was enjoying what I considered peak bachelor living: cereal for dinner, sports running on every screen, and the same hoodie for 48 straight hours. Thriving, basically. Then the furnace began making a noise. Not an ordinary noise. Not the normal groan and click every furnace seems to make when the weather is cold enough to freeze your common sense. This was different. Low, repetitive, metallic. Like something made of metal was chewing on something it had no business chewing on. I called the first HVAC company that appeared on Google. A guy named Rick arrived about 40 minutes later. Rick Dalton from Dalton & Sons Heating and Cooling. Friendly guy, big mustache, smelled lightly of coffee and motor oil. "Give me 20 minutes, Rick said as he headed toward the basement. So I gave him 20 minutes. I made a sandwich, watched half of a sports highlight reel, continued living my life. Then my phone vibrated. It was a text from Rick, who was literally downstairs in my basement. "Mr. Carter, there's a locked door behind your storage shelves. Who's inside?" I actually laughed. I typed back, "Rick, buddy, we don't have a locked door back there." 3 dots appeared. Then another message. "Sir, I can hear breathing inside, and there are 4 padlocks on the outside." I stopped chewing. 4 padlocks. On the outside. I need you to understand what that detail means, because I did not fully understand it in that moment. Locks on the outside of a door are not there to stop someone from getting in. They are there to stop whatever is inside from getting out. That is not security. That is a cage. I was down those basement stairs in less than 10 seconds. Rick stood in front of our old metal storage shelves, the same shelves Melissa had insisted we keep, even though I had suggested donating them 3 different times. They had been pulled slightly away from the wall. Behind them was a door I had never seen once in 15 years of living in that house. 15 years. It was a plain hollow core door, painted the exact same gray as the basement wall. With the shelves pushed flush against it, the way they had always been, you would never know the door existed. 4 heavy-duty padlocks hung from 4 separate hasps, and behind the door came a faint but unmistakable sound, slow, rhythmic breathing. "Call the police," I told Rick. "Already dialing," he said. 3 officers arrived within 8 minutes. I stood in my own basement, feeling like a visitor inside someone else's nightmare while they cut through the locks. I kept texting Melissa, "Hey, call me. Something's going on." No reply. She was probably out at dinner with Jenna. That is what I kept telling myself. I needed something to tell myself. The door opened. The room was empty. Not mostly empty. Completely empty. Swept clean. Bare concrete floor. One exposed bulb hanging overhead, not even turned on. A small Bluetooth speaker sat in the corner, still warm when one of the officers touched it, and beside it on the floor was a cheap burner phone with a cracked screen propped on a cardboard box. The breathing was not real. It was a recording. A loop. Triggered remotely. Officer Nolan, a young guy who looked like he had graduated from high school sometime last Thursday, picked up the burner phone with gloved hands and examined it. "Someone activated this recently," he said. "Probably within the last hour." "So, somebody triggered it while Rick was down here?" I asked. "Looks that way. Stay with me here, because this is the moment when it felt like the floor shifted under my feet, even though I had not moved. Someone knew Rick was in my basement. Someone waited until he got close to those shelves. Then that person triggered a recording designed to make a furnace technician panic and text the homeowner. Designed to make the homeowner call the police. Designed to put 3 officers inside a hidden room in my house. This was not a prank. It was choreography. They found the storage unit receipt 48 hours later. I cannot tell you exactly when the change happened, when I stopped being treated as the homeowner and started being treated like a person of interest. It happened quietly. That is how bad things usually happen. One minute Officer Nolan was asking normal questions. The next, a detective named Grant Mercer was sitting across from me at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, asking whether I had ever visited a storage facility on Mercer Road. I had not, except the record said I had, twice. Cash payments. My name was on the rental agreement, and when police opened Unit 114, they found women's clothing, a prepaid debit card connected to an account in my name, and a photograph. A woman I had never seen, 30-something. Dark hair, smiling at the camera like she had no idea what that picture would someday be used for. "Mr. Carter," Detective Mercer said, studying my expression very carefully. "This woman was reported missing 11 days ago. Her name is Natalie Brooks. Do you know her?" "No," I said. "I've never seen her before in my life." That was the truth. Completely true. But here is what broke something open inside my chest. It was the one thing I did not tell Detective Mercer that night, because I needed to be alone before I could even decide what it meant. When I got home, I went upstairs, straight to our bedroom, straight to the shelf above Melissa's nightstand where she kept her books, the ones she had already read, the ones she returned to, the ones she wanted close. I pulled them out one at a time, and there she was, Natalie Brooks, printed on a small square of photo paper and hidden inside the back cover of Melissa's worn copy of In Cold Blood, smiling. I sat on the edge of the bed we had shared for 15 years, inside a house that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else, holding a photograph of a missing woman that my wife had hidden in plain sight. And I thought about all 18 years, every dinner, every vacation, every quiet Sunday morning when I had watched Melissa read that exact book with her coffee. 1 sugar, splash of oat milk, perfectly calm. How long had Natalie Brooks been tucked inside that back cover? How long had Melissa been preparing this? At 51, I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a man was losing his health, his job, or his mind. I was wrong. The worst thing is discovering that the person sleeping beside you for 15 years may never have been there in the way you believed. If you have been listening for a while and you want more stories like this, it really does help when you hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you. Seriously. Here is something nobody tells you about being framed by your own wife. The hardest part is not the evidence. It is realizing the woman you loved was not confused, not lost, not going through some temporary phase. She was always working. Always. I need you to understand where my head was at this point. 6 days had passed since Rick Dalton texted me from my basement. 6 days since 3 police officers stood inside a scrubbed, empty room in my house and looked at me like I was someone worth keeping an eye on. 6 days since Detective Grant Mercer started appearing. Not always with warning, not always with questions. Sometimes he was simply there, parked one house down in a Crown Victoria, like I would somehow fail to notice a car idling on a residential street. I noticed Grant. I am 51, not blind. Melissa came back from Atlanta 2 days after the basement incident. I had not explained everything over the phone. I only told her something strange had happened, and she needed to come home. When she walked through the front door, she looked exactly like a concerned wife should. Worried eyes, a tight hug, both hands holding my face. "Daniel, what happened? Are you okay?" And God help me, for roughly 45 minutes I believed her. She cried when I showed her the room. Real tears, or tears that looked real. I am still not certain there is a difference. She held my arm while I explained the locks, the speaker, the burner phone. She said exactly what a loving wife was supposed to say. "That's terrifying. Who would do something like this? Should we get a lawyer?" That last sentence. Should we get a lawyer? At the time, I thought she was protecting me. Now I know she was being precise. The storage unit damaged her performance. Only for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. When Detective Mercer returned 4 days later and told both of us about Unit 1114 on Mercer Road, I watched Melissa's face. Most people would have missed it. It lasted maybe half a heartbeat, a tiny involuntary stillness. Like a computer, freezing for 1 second before recovering. Then the tears returned. "Somebody is setting Daniel up," she said firmly, reaching for my hand across the kitchen table. "This is clearly a setup. My husband has never been to that storage unit." Mercer looked at her, then at me, then back at her. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "how do you know it's clearly a setup?" She answered instantly, "Because I know my husband." I replayed that exchange about 400 times over the next 2 days. She did not say, "He would never do something like this." She did not say, "That is impossible." She said she knew me. The focus stayed on certainty, not character. It was the answer of a lawyer wearing the voice of a wife. Precise. This is where the whole thing starts becoming architectural. Stay with me. I have a friend named Peter Collins. We have known each other since college, which means he has known me long enough to tell me something painful without softening it. Peter works in insurance fraud investigation. His entire professional life is built around understanding how people create lies that can pass for truth. I called him on day 7 and told him everything. He stayed silent for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Daniel, how many joint accounts do you and Melissa have?" 3. Checking, savings, and a household card. Who handles them? I opened my mouth, then closed it. Melissa handled them. She had managed our finances since the second year of our marriage, after I casually said one day that budgeting bored me, and she offered to take care of it. I had never really thought about it again. Why would I? Bills got paid, savings went up, everything looked normal. Pull every statement, Peter said. Every one. Go back at least 5 years. I pulled 7. What I discovered did not jump off the page. That was what made it so good. There were no huge withdrawals, no dramatic transfers to mysterious offshore accounts. Nothing that would make an audience gasp immediately. Instead, there were small movements, patient movements, methodical movements. $100 here, sent toward an account I did not recognize. A recurring subscription payment to a business name I had never heard before. A cash withdrawal every 3rd month. Never enough to attract attention. Always just beneath the level that would require reporting. Across 7 years, it totaled a little more than $60,000. $60,000 moved so quietly that I had never heard it happen. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I sat at my kitchen desk, staring at those statements, and felt a type of cold I had never felt before. Not fear, scale, because this was not something Melissa started after one bad year. It was not some decision made during a rough patch. The first strange transaction was dated 14 months after our wedding. 14 months. She began whatever this was while we were still unpacking boxes in our first apartment. Peter came over the next morning. We covered the dining room table with everything. Bank statements, storage unit paperwork, the police report, a timeline I had built on a legal pad around 3 a.m. Peter looked through it for a long time without saying a word. That is how Peter shows respect when what he is seeing is worse than you think it is. Finally he said, "The storage unit rental. Walk me through your phone that week." "What do you mean? Where was your phone the night before the rental agreement was signed?" I thought about it. "On the nightstand, I charge it there every night." Peter looked at me. "And where was Melissa?" "In the bedroom, obviously. We sleep in the same room. We shared a room. We shared a bed." We had done that for 15 years, and not once had I considered my charging phone on the nightstand to be a vulnerability. She had taken it while I slept, driven to Mercer Road, signed a storage agreement using my name. She knew my signature, the way you know the words to a song you have heard 10,000 times. Paid cash, set up the unit, and returned home before my alarm sounded. I tried to remember the next morning. Had she seemed tired, different, off? I could not remember. I could not remember because it had been a Tuesday, and on Tuesdays I leave early for a 7 a.m. budget call. I kiss her forehead, grab my travel mug, and walk out without looking back. 18 years of not looking back. Then Peter said quietly, "The furnace call." I looked at him. "You said you called the HVAC company the morning the furnace started making that noise. Did you use your cell or a landline?" "We haven't had a landline in years." "So your cell?" "Yes." Pull the outgoing call log for that morning. Before I opened it, I already knew what I was going to see. I think some part of me had known from the second Rick texted me in the basement. I simply had not been willing to stare directly at it. The call to Dalton & Sons Heating and Cooling had been placed from my number at 8:47 a.m. I had been inside my office by 7 o'clock. My parking garage timestamp proved it. Melissa had made the call. Using my phone. Maybe she had taken it again. Maybe she had held on to it longer than I realized. Either way, She had used my number to arrange for a repair technician she knew would eventually go into the basement. A technician who would move near those shelves, see the hidden door, hear breathing, and text me an alarm. She had designed the entire opening act, the furnace noise. I still do not know exactly how she caused it, but Peter thinks it may have been something small attached to the blower, some simple removable mechanical device. The secret room, either built or found and prepared over who knows how long. The recording, the burner phone, the exact timing of the remote trigger. She had been in Atlanta having dinner with Jenna, and from there, with one tap through a remote app, she had put all of it into motion. While I sat upstairs eating a sandwich and watching highlights. "Daniel," Peter said, and his voice dropped into the tone men use when they are about to say something they wish they did not have to say. "This is not something a person builds in a couple of months. The financial movement alone goes back 7 years. The identity setup, your name on accounts you never opened, your prints connected to a unit you never visited, that takes repetition, practice. She didn't just study you." He paused. "She became fluent in you." I got up from the table and went to the kitchen window. I stared into the backyard, the grass I had cut 1,000 times, the garden Melissa had planted 2 summers earlier, the garden I had helped water every evening that fall because she told me the seedlings needed consistency. I had watered her garden while she was building my grave. At 51 years old, I had one move left, and I had not told Peter about it. I had not told anyone, because the only way it could work was if Melissa believed, totally and convincingly, that everything she had planned was working. She needed to believe she had won, and I needed her comfortable for just a little longer. There is a specific kind of silence that settles into a man when fear ends and something colder takes its place. I found that silence on a Wednesday morning, sitting at my kitchen table, cold coffee beside me. 7 years of bank statements spread out in front of me, and I made a decision. I have not lost a minute of sleep over since. I did not call an attorney. I did not confront Melissa. I did not take what Peter and I had found back to Detective Mercer. Because evidence only helps if the person presenting it is considered believable. And right then, in the eyes of Columbus police, I was a 51-year-old man whose name was attached to a storage unit holding possessions that belonged to a missing woman. My credibility was not exactly in perfect condition. Melissa had accounted for that too. Of course she had. So I did the one thing she had not prepared for. I became someone she could not read. First, I called my brother, Mark. Mark Carter, retired Army. Lives in Dayton now. The kind of man who legally owns 3 guns, speaks almost entirely in short sentences, and has never panicked about anything in his life. On Thursday morning, I drove to Dayton. I told Melissa I needed a few days to clear my head. I watched her arrange her face into a perfect expression of sympathetic understanding. "Take whatever time you need, baby," she said. I almost smiled. At Mark's kitchen table, over black coffee and leftover cornbread, I laid out the entire story. The basement, the storage unit, the financial records, the call history. The photograph inside in cold blood. Mark listened without interrupting. For him, that is basically the same as another person screaming in horror. When I finished, he stayed quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "You said she talks to somebody she trusts." "Her friend Susan," I said. "Susan Palmer. They've been close since before Melissa and I met. They talk every week, sometimes twice. In person or by phone. Both. Susan lives in Cincinnati. She comes over maybe 4 times a year. They also have these long phone calls, 2 or 3 hours sometimes. Melissa takes them in the sunroom and closes the door. Mark nodded slowly. How long ago did you put the baby monitor in the sunroom? I stared at him. He stared back, completely serious. Mark, I said, I haven't. I know you haven't, he said, but you're going to. I want to make one thing clear. I am not naturally a vengeful person. I coached youth soccer for 11 years. I have never thrown a punch outside a gym. At a cookout, I am the guy making sure everyone has a drink and remembering who is vegetarian. Vengeance is not part of my original wiring, but I am patient, extremely patient. And patience, I learned, is the only currency that matters when the game is long. Mark ordered the monitor online, paid cash at a UPS store kiosk, had it sent to a P.O. box, the kind of operational precision that apparently becomes permanent after 18 years in the Army. I drove home on Saturday, told Melissa I was feeling better. Let her hug me in the doorway while I counted the beats of her heart against my chest, and I felt nothing. That may have been the strangest part. No rage, no grief, only clarity. I installed the monitor on Sunday afternoon while Melissa was out grocery shopping. Small device, wireless, hidden behind a decorative plant on the sunroom windowsill. A plant I had never moved once in 15 years. Neither had she. It took 4 minutes. That evening I drove to Mark's place. We confirmed the audio feed came through clearly on his laptop. Then I drove home for dinner. Melissa made pasta. Asked whether I was starting to feel like myself again. Getting there, I said. She smiled, refilled my glass of water. Then I waited 19 days. 19 days of being Daniel Carter. Loving husband, cooperative homeowner, casual subject inside a missing person investigation. 19 days of answering Detective Mercer's questions calmly. 19 days of allowing Melissa to hold my hand in front of him. 19 days of watching her perform concern so perfectly that I even had moments, brief and disorienting moments, where I wondered if I had somehow constructed all of this inside my own grief. Then, on a Thursday evening in the 3rd week, Susan Palmer came to visit. I removed myself from the house, told Melissa I was going to Peter's for the evening, kissed her on the cheek, drove exactly 4 blocks, parked, opened my phone. The audio came through perfectly. For 20 minutes, they discussed completely ordinary things. Susan's job, a cousin's wedding, a restaurant in Cincinnati that was apparently worth the drive. I almost began convincing myself that I had been wrong, that I had hidden a listening device in my own sunroom because of paranoia, pain, and Peter Collins's insurance fraud instincts. Then Melissa's voice changed. It was slight, like a musician moving from one key into another. Same instrument, same hands, but everything underneath it was different. Her voice got lower, more exact. All the warmth disappeared from it, the way water steadily leaves a bathtub. He has no idea, Melissa said. Susan stayed silent for a second. You're sure? He's walking around here making me coffee in the mornings. Grant is treating him like a suspect, and Daniel is just, he's still Daniel. He's exactly who he's always been. He can't see past what is directly in front of him. He never could. And the woman? Natalie? Safe, Melissa said. She agreed to disappear for 60 days. She's in Phoenix. I paid her enough that she won't talk. By the time those 60 days are over, Daniel will be buried too deep for it to matter. A pause. Melissa. Susan's voice sounded cautious now. What actually happens to him? He becomes the answer to the question the police are already asking, Melissa said. They have his name, his prints, his financial trail. All I have to do is let the rest keep building. Give it a few more weeks, and it won't need me anymore. It'll have its own gravity. And where will you be? Somewhere warm, Melissa said. Then she laughed. Not nervous laughter. Relaxed laughter. The easy kind that comes out when everything is unfolding exactly as planned. I sat in my parked car 4 blocks from my own house, listening to my wife laugh while explaining the structure of my destruction. And that quiet came back, cold, motionless, absolute. I did not call Mark. I did not call Peter. I did not call Detective Mercer. Not yet. I need to tell you about Natalie Brooks, because she matters. 2 days after Susan's visit, I hired a private investigator named Victor Hale, retired Columbus police. Peter recommended him. Victor was the kind of man whose entire personality reminded you of a filing cabinet. I gave him one instruction: find Natalie Brooks. It took him 6 days. She was in Phoenix. Exactly where Melissa said she would be, staying in a mid-range hotel on Camelback Road, paying cash, registered under a slightly altered name. Victor got photographs, got her on the record, and got a notarized statement from a woman who, as it turned out, had never completely understood what she had agreed to do. She was much less comfortable once a private investigator sat across from her in a hotel lobby and explained what the word accessory could mean. Natalie Brooks was not a criminal mastermind. She was a woman who needed money and made a disastrous decision. She told us everything: how Melissa contacted her, how much she was paid, how she was instructed to stay out of sight for 60 days. She signed the statement while her hands shook. Then she cried for around 10 minutes. Victor sat there with her until she stopped. Unexpectedly decent for a man who looked like a filing cabinet. At that point, I had 2 things Melissa had no idea existed: the recorded conversation from the sunroom and a signed statement from the missing woman who was not actually missing. Here is what I did not do. I did not immediately walk into Columbus Police Headquarters and hand them the evidence, because evidence submitted by a suspect, even evidence that clears him, becomes part of a legal process. A slow, grinding, public process. Melissa would hire a lawyer, stop talking, and then spend the next 18 months trying to dismantle everything I had built from the other side. She was very good at dismantling things. I knew that now, so I chose something simpler. On a Friday evening, Melissa sat in the sunroom reading her book. In cold blood, of course. The audacity of this woman. I sat at the kitchen table and sent 2 files from an email account she had never seen to a phone number she did not recognize. 1 audio file. 1 photograph. Natalie Brooks alive in Phoenix, holding that day's newspaper. No message. No signature. No explanation. I closed the laptop. Washed my coffee mug. Went upstairs. 40 minutes later, Melissa came into the bedroom. Through barely opened eyes, I watched her stand in the doorway, phone in her hand, completely still. In 15 years, I had never seen Melissa Carter stand completely still. She was always in motion, always organizing, adjusting, managing. But she stood in that doorway like a woman who had suddenly heard a noise she could not locate. Good. The next morning I drove to Detective Mercer's office. I put Victor Hale's full report on his desk. The statement, the photographs, the bank records, the call logs, everything. Organized inside a navy blue folder with a metal clasp because I am a thorough man. Mercer read for 11 minutes without lifting his eyes. Finally he said, "Mr. Carter." "Grant," I said, "I think we both know I never rented that storage unit." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. Melissa was arrested on a Tuesday. 14 charges, including conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction. At 9 in the morning, on a day cold enough that every breath showed in the air, officers walked her out of our house in handcuffs. I stood in the doorway and watched. She looked back at me once, only once, as they guided her toward the patrol car. And for the first time in 18 years, I could not read her expression. I could not see the calculation behind her eyes. I could not find the woman who had studied me the way a forger studies somebody else's signature. She just looked at me, and I nodded, because this is what Melissa never understood about me. This was the basic mistake sitting at the center of her perfect plan. She spent years watching what I did, where I went, how I signed my name, how I slept. But she never paid attention to what was happening inside my head. At 51 years old, I am not a dramatic man. I do not give speeches. I do not slam doors. I do not need the final word. I only need the final move. She spent 15 years building a prison for me. I built hers in 19 days. Somewhere out there, Melissa Carter is looking over her shoulder for a ghost she created. A man she underestimated. A husband she believed she understood completely. She knew my signature. She never knew my spine. And that was always going to be the one mistake she could not survive. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting the like button and subscribing for more real, raw, family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being part of Dad's Raw Revenge. I will see you in the next one.